On the morning of December 18, 1944, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi stood in a tunnel 75 feet beneath the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima, studying blueprints that every traditional Japanese officer had called suicide. 53 years old, cavalry veteran, former military attaché to the United States, 0 battles won as a general. The Americans were coming with more firepower than any invasion force in history, and Kuribayashi had just ordered his men to do something no Japanese commander had ever done. He ordered them not to fight, not on the beaches, not in banzai charges, not in any way that resembled Japanese military doctrine. His superiors in Tokyo called his defensive plan cowardice. His own colonels called it dishonor. When he had presented his strategy to Imperial General Headquarters 3 months earlier, one staff officer said the plan read like it was written by an American. Kuribayashi thanked him. That officer did not understand it was a compliment. The Japanese High Command expected Kuribayashi to defend Iwo Jima the same way every other island had been defended. Meet the Americans on the beaches with maximum force, drive them back into the sea, or perish gloriously trying. Saipan had been defended that way. The Japanese lost 29,000 men in 3 weeks. Guam had been defended that way. The Japanese lost 18,000 men in 3 weeks. Peleliu had been defended that way. The Japanese lost 10,000 men in over 2 months. Every island defense followed the same doctrine. Immediate counterattack, banzai charges at night, death before surrender. And every island defense ended the same way. Total defeat in weeks, sometimes days. Kuribayashi had watched these islands fall while serving on the Imperial General Staff. He had studied the casualty reports, read the after-action assessments, analyzed what remained of Japanese defensive positions after American bombardment. He reached a conclusion that would have gotten him court-martialed if he had said it aloud. Japanese tactics were designed to lose. They were designed for an enemy that fought the way Japan fought, with comparable firepower and industrial capacity. They were not designed for an enemy with unlimited artillery, unlimited air support, and unlimited replacement troops. They were not designed for America. Kuribayashi knew this because he had spent 2 years in America, and he understood what his fellow officers refused to accept. America was not like other nations. It did not fight wars the way other nations fought wars. Kuribayashi had arrived in Washington in January of 1928 as deputy military attaché. He was 36 years old, a cavalry officer with no combat experience and very little English. The assignment was meant to be a career placeholder, 2 years of diplomatic functions and intelligence gathering before returning to a regiment command in Manchuria. Instead, those 2 years changed everything Kuribayashi believed about warfare. He traveled across the United States, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the Canadian border to the Mexican border. He visited factories in Detroit, oil fields in Texas, farms in Iowa, steel mills in Pennsylvania. He attended maneuvers at Fort Bliss, where American cavalry units trained with tanks and armored cars. He watched the U.S. Army practice combined arms tactics that integrated infantry, artillery, armor, and aircraft into coordinated operations. The Japanese army was still teaching cavalry charges. Kuribayashi wrote detailed reports to Tokyo describing what he had seen. American industrial capacity was beyond anything Japan could match. American logistics were beyond anything Japan could imagine. American firepower was beyond anything Japanese doctrine accounted for. The reports were filed and ignored. Kuribayashi returned to Japan in 1930 with a conviction that shaped the rest of his military career. Japan must never fight America. If Japan fought America, Japan would lose. Not might lose, would lose. The industrial disparity was too large, the geographical disadvantage too severe, the logistical challenge too overwhelming. Kuribayashi said this privately to fellow officers. Some agreed quietly. Most thought he was a defeatist. One colonel reported him to the Kempeitai, the military police. Kuribayashi was reprimanded and transferred to a training command in northern China. For the next decade, Kuribayashi commanded cavalry units in Manchuria and China. He was a competent officer, respected by his men, but not particularly distinguished. He rose through ranks slowly, making colonel in 1936, major general in 1941. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, Kuribayashi was commanding the Imperial Guards Division in Tokyo. He did not celebrate. He told his wife that Japan had just signed its own surrender. His wife asked how he could say such a thing after such a great victory. Kuribayashi explained that Americans did not think like Japanese. They would not seek an honorable peace. They would seek total victory, and they had the industrial capacity to achieve it. The war would last 3 years, maybe 4, and it would end with American forces occupying Japan itself. His wife asked if he truly believed that. Kuribayashi said he had seen Detroit. Over the next 3 years, Kuribayashi watched his prediction come true. Midway, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, Guam, Peleliu. Every battle brought American forces closer to Japan. Every battle demonstrated that Japanese tactics were obsolete. In May of 1944, Kuribayashi received orders to report to Tokyo. Imperial General Headquarters had a new assignment. Kuribayashi would take command of the 109th Division and all naval forces on Iwo Jima. His mission was to defend the island. He was given no timeline, no reinforcement schedule, no evacuation plan. The orders were clear. Hold Iwo Jima as long as possible. Kuribayashi knew what that meant. Hold until everyone is gone, then go yourself. Iwo Jima was an 8-square-mile volcanic rock, 750 miles south of Tokyo. The island had 3 airfields, which made it strategically valuable. Japanese fighters operating from Iwo Jima could intercept American B-29 bombers flying from the Marianas to bomb Japan. American fighters operating from Iwo Jima could escort those same bombers all the way to Tokyo. Whoever controlled Iwo Jima controlled the air war over Japan. The island was impossible to defend by conventional means. No harbor, no natural barriers, beaches on all sides, dominated by Mount Suribachi, a 554-foot extinct volcano on the southern tip. Every previous island defense had positioned the main force near the beaches to drive invaders back into the sea. Kuribayashi arrived on Iwo Jima in June of 1944 and immediately ordered the opposite. No defenses on the beaches, no troops positioned to repel the landing, no counterattack within the first 24 hours. His officers were horrified. Colonel Nishi, a former Olympic gold medalist in equestrian, demanded to know how they would stop the Americans if not on the beaches. Kuribayashi explained they would not stop the Americans. Not on the beaches, not anywhere. The Americans would land. They would establish a beachhead. They would bring tanks, artillery, and flamethrowers ashore. Trying to stop this was pointless. Trying to stop this was how every other island had been lost in 3 weeks. Kuribayashi had a different plan. If they could not stop the Americans from landing, they would make the Americans pay for every yard of ground. Not in days, in months. Not in hundreds of casualties, in thousands. This required abandoning every principle of Japanese military doctrine. No banzai charges. Banzai charges allowed Americans to destroy Japanese forces with artillery and machine gun fire. No suicidal attacks. Suicidal attacks wasted men without inflicting equivalent American casualties. No fighting from fixed surface positions. Surface positions could be destroyed by naval gunfire and airstrikes. Instead, Kuribayashi ordered his engineers to dig. Not trenches, tunnels. Miles of tunnels connecting hundreds of reinforced caves and bunkers, all underground, all invisible from the air or sea, all designed to survive sustained bombardment. The plan was to turn Iwo Jima into a fortress that existed entirely beneath the surface. American ships could bombard for weeks and hit nothing important. American planes could drop bombs for months and destroy nothing critical. When Americans landed and moved inland, they would be walking over the entire Japanese defensive position without seeing it. Then, from hidden firing positions, from camouflaged caves, from reinforced bunkers buried under volcanic rock, Japanese forces would open fire. Not to drive the Americans back, to inflict casualties, to slow the advance, to make every yard cost American lives. This was not Bushido. This was mathematics. Kuribayashi calculated that each day Iwo Jima held was one more day before American bombers reached Tokyo. Each week Iwo Jima held was one more week Japanese civilians had to prepare for invasion. Each American casualty was one less soldier available for the invasion of Japan. The mission was not to win. The mission was to delay, to hurt, to make America reconsider the cost of conquering Japan. His officers hated it. They argued that hiding in tunnels was cowardly. They argued that Japanese soldiers should die gloriously, not huddle underground. They argued that fighting the American way was dishonorable. Kuribayashi listened patiently, then issued orders that were not negotiable. Any officer who ordered a banzai charge would be relieved of command. Any soldier who left his position without orders would be disciplined. Any man who wasted his life without inflicting American casualties was failing his duty. Victory was not an option. Survival until relief arrived was not an option. There would be no relief. The mission was to delay American victory and inflict maximum casualties during that delay. Honor was in efficiency, not theatrics. Some officers accepted this, others did not. Kuribayashi relieved 3 battalion commanders in the first month for insubordination. He reassigned company commanders who continued to advocate for traditional tactics. He personally inspected every defensive position and rejected any that were visible from likely American approach routes. By September of 1944, Iwo Jima had over 11 miles of tunnels. The main tunnel network connected command posts, ammunition storage, field hospitals, troop barracks, and firing positions. Ventilation shafts provided air without creating visible openings. Multiple entrances and exits allowed forces to reposition without exposing themselves to American fire. The engineering achievement was remarkable. Japanese miners and Korean laborers worked in shifts, digging through volcanic rock with hand tools, pneumatic drills, and explosives. The volcanic rock was softer than granite but harder than sandstone. Some tunnels reached 75 feet below the surface. Others descended deeper, to levels where American bombardment could never reach. The deepest chambers housed Kuribayashi's command post, medical facilities, and ammunition magazines. These chambers had electric lighting powered by generators, though Kuribayashi ordered conservation of fuel. Most tunnels relied on natural light during the day and lanterns at night. The tunnel system was not a single network, but multiple networks, each serving a different sector of the island. If Americans captured one network, the others remained operational. This compartmentalization meant the defense could not be collapsed from a single breakthrough. Firing positions were designed to provide overlapping fields of fire while remaining invisible until the moment Japanese soldiers opened fire. Then the position could be abandoned through tunnels before American artillery could respond. Each firing position had specific tasks. Some were designed to target landing craft approaching the beach. Others were positioned to fire on Marines climbing the terraces beyond the beach. Still, others covered the likely routes Americans would take moving inland. The entire island was mapped into kill zones, each covered by multiple weapons from different positions. Kuribayashi personally inspected hundreds of these positions. He would stand where he expected American Marines to stand, looking back toward Japanese positions. If he could see any sign of the position, a roof line, a firing port, a ventilation shaft, he ordered it camouflaged or redesigned. Nothing could be visible. He also ordered his men to practice discipline. Fire only when targets were certain. Fire only when you have clear shots. Do not fire if you will reveal your position without inflicting casualties. Conserve ammunition. Every round mattered. There would be no resupply. Kuribayashi also did something no previous island commander had done. He studied American tactics. He read captured Marine Corps field manuals. He interrogated prisoners from Saipan and Guam about American assault procedures. He analyzed American combined arms doctrine, understanding how infantry, armor, artillery, and air support coordinated during island assaults. The prisoners provided valuable intelligence. They described how Marines called for naval gunfire support when they encountered resistance. They explained how American tanks supported infantry advances. They detailed how American combat engineers cleared obstacles and fortifications. They described the coordination between ground forces and aircraft. Kuribayashi took notes on everything. He learned that American doctrine emphasized speed and momentum. Americans wanted to overwhelm defenses quickly, secure objectives rapidly, move to the next island. American commanders measured success in days, not weeks or months. This understanding shaped his defensive strategy. If Americans valued speed, he would create a defense that denied speed. If Americans relied on overwhelming firepower, he would create positions that firepower could not reach. If Americans expected quick victory, he would prepare for prolonged resistance. Then he designed defenses specifically to counter American tactics. Americans advanced behind rolling artillery barrages. Kuribayashi positioned his forces deep enough that artillery could not reach them. The tunnels provided protection. American artillery could destroy surface positions, but Japanese soldiers would be safely underground until the barrage lifted. Americans used tanks to break defensive lines. Kuribayashi sighted 47mm anti-tank guns in hidden positions with perfect fields of fire across open ground, where American armor would have to advance. Each anti-tank gun had multiple firing positions connected by tunnels. After firing several rounds from one position, the crew would move through tunnels to another position and continue firing. Americans would destroy the first position, only to take fire from a second position they could not see. Americans cleared caves with flamethrowers and explosives. Kuribayashi designed tunnel systems with blast doors that sealed sections after they were compromised. When Americans cleared one cave, they thought they had eliminated the position, but the cave connected to larger tunnels that remained intact. Japanese soldiers would wait until Americans moved forward, then reoccupy the cave from another entrance and resume firing. Americans used close air support to destroy visible targets. Kuribayashi ensured there were no visible targets. Every gun position had a camouflaged roof. Every cave entrance was hidden. Every pillbox was reinforced with concrete and covered with volcanic sand that radar could not detect. Kuribayashi employed several specific innovations in camouflage and deception. Gun positions were built into natural features, rock formations that appeared unchanged from the air. Cave entrances were hidden behind curtains of vegetation or positioned in shadows that aerial photography could not penetrate. False positions were constructed to draw American fire away from real positions. These decoys appeared to be bunkers or gun emplacements, but were actually empty structures designed to waste American ammunition. When American ships bombarded these false positions, Japanese soldiers remained safely hidden in the real positions nearby. Artillery pieces were positioned on rails inside tunnels. Japanese gunners would roll the guns forward to firing positions, fire several rounds, then roll them back into the tunnels before American counter-battery fire could arrive. This mobile artillery tactic proved extremely effective. Americans would identify the position of Japanese artillery, direct naval gunfire at that position, and destroy empty ground while the actual guns sat safely in tunnels. Anti-aircraft guns were positioned inside caves, with firing ports just large enough for the barrel. From the air, these positions were invisible. American pilots could not see them until they opened fire, and by then the attacking aircraft was already in danger. Kuribayashi also employed deception in his use of mines and obstacles. He placed obstacles where they would channel American attacks into kill zones. Tank traps were positioned to force American armor into areas covered by anti-tank guns. Wire obstacles were placed not to stop Americans, but to slow them down while they were in range of Japanese weapons. In October of 1944, Kuribayashi wrote a letter to his wife. He told her he would not return from Iwo Jima. He told her his death was certain, but his death would have purpose. Every day Americans spent conquering Iwo Jima was one more day Japan had to prepare. He told her not to be sad. He was doing what needed to be done. His wife received that letter in November. By then, American forces had conquered the Philippines. The next target was obvious. If you want to see how an island defense designed by someone who understood American tactics performed against the most powerful invasion force in history, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this. And please subscribe if you have not already. Back to Kuribayashi. In January of 1945, American intelligence estimated Japanese forces on Iwo Jima at 13,000 men. The actual number was 22,000. American intelligence identified fewer than 100 defensive positions from aerial reconnaissance. Kuribayashi had built over 1,500. American intelligence expected 2 weeks to secure the island. Kuribayashi had prepared for months. Beginning in December of 1944, American aircraft and naval forces conducted a 70-day bombardment campaign against Iwo Jima. Over 22,000 shells and bombs struck the island during this extended preparation. The final 3-day naval bombardment began on February 16, 1945. American cruisers, battleships, and destroyers concentrated fire on visible targets. When the bombardment ended on February 18th, American commanders believed most Japanese defenses had been destroyed. They believed Japanese forces were disorganized, demoralized, and incapable of sustained resistance. They were wrong. Kuribayashi had ordered his men to remain in the tunnels during the entire bombardment. Not one soldier was to return fire. Not one gun position was to reveal itself. Americans needed to believe the bombardment had worked. Americans needed to land feeling confident. On the morning of February 19th, 1945, the first wave of Marines landed on the southeastern beaches of Iwo Jima. 70 boats carrying 1,400 Marines hit the beach at 9:02. No resistance, no gunfire. Marines moved inland, expecting immediate contact. Nothing. The beach was empty. Marines climbed the terraces beyond the beach, establishing the beachhead. Still nothing. After 30 minutes, some Marines thought the bombardment had actually worked. Others suspected a trap. At 9:35, Japanese forces opened fire, not from the beaches, from Mount Suribachi. From the high ground inland, from camouflaged positions the bombardment had never touched. Artillery, mortars, machine guns, anti-tank guns, all from positions Marines could not see, could not locate, could not suppress. The beach became a killing zone. Marines could not advance inland because of interlocking fire from hidden positions. They could not retreat because more landing craft were arriving behind them. They could not dig in because the volcanic sand collapsed into any hole deeper than 2 feet. Casualties mounted immediately. Within the first hour, American commanders realized this was not like other islands. The Japanese were not counterattacking. They were not wasting lives in banzai charges. They were fighting smart, from prepared positions, with coordinated fields of fire. By nightfall on February 19th, 30,000 Marines had landed. 2,500 were casualties. The beachhead was secured, but the advance inland had gained less than 700 yards. Marines had expected to reach the first airfield by the end of the first day. They had not. Kuribayashi had predicted this. His plan was working exactly as designed. Americans could land. Americans could establish their beachhead. But moving inland would cost them dearly. The casualties shocked American commanders. 2,500 men in one day was more than expected for the entire first week. The wounded overwhelmed medical facilities. Hospital ships offshore received hundreds of Marines with wounds from artillery fragments, machine gun fire, and the brutal hand-to-hand combat required to clear individual positions. Marines discovered that standard tactics did not work on Iwo Jima. On other islands, when Japanese positions opened fire, Marines would call for naval gunfire or airstrikes, destroy the position, and advance. On Iwo Jima, positions could not be seen until they fired. When Marines called for support and the bombardment arrived, the Japanese soldiers were already back in the tunnels. When the bombardment ended and Marines advanced, the same positions opened fire again. The volcanic sand created additional problems. Marines could not dig proper foxholes because the sand collapsed. They could not use sandbags effectively because the sand was too fine and too loose. They had to improvise with whatever materials they could find, using driftwood, steel matting from the beach, and debris from destroyed landing craft. The sulfuric smell from the volcanic vents sickened many Marines. The island smelled of death and sulfur, a combination that some Marines would remember for the rest of their lives. Water was scarce. Resupply from the beach was difficult because Japanese artillery continued firing on the beach throughout the day and night. That night, Marines prepared for the traditional Japanese nighttime banzai charge. Officers briefed their men on what to expect. Thousands of Japanese soldiers would rush American positions, screaming, firing, seeking death in glorious battle. Marines set up machine guns, registered artillery coordinates, prepared illumination rounds. The attack never came. Kuribayashi had forbidden it. On February 20, Marines attacked toward Mount Suribachi. The advance covered 200 yards in 6 hours. Every yard was contested. Japanese soldiers fired from hidden positions, then disappeared into tunnels before Marines could respond. Machine gun nests would suddenly open fire, inflict casualties, then go silent. When Marines assaulted the position, they found it empty. The Japanese had withdrawn through tunnels to secondary positions. On February 21, Marines advanced 400 yards toward the first airfield. On February 22, they advanced 300 yards. On February 23, Marines reached the summit of Mount Suribachi and raised the American flag. The photograph became the most famous image of the Pacific War, but taking Suribachi had required 4 days of brutal fighting and cost over 900 casualties. The mountain had been the easy part. The rest of the island was worse. Kuribayashi had positioned his main defences in the northern part of Iwo Jima, in an area the Marines called the Meat Grinder. This area contained 3 distinct defensive positions: Hill 382, the highest point on the island; Turkey Knob, a fortified rise overlooking approaches to 382. The amphitheatre, a natural depression surrounded by high ground and fortified bunkers. All 3 positions were connected by tunnels. All 3 had overlapping fields of fire. All 3 had been designed to funnel American attacks into kill zones. Marines attacked Hill 382 on February 24. The attack lasted 11 days. Every yard was contested. Japanese soldiers appeared from nowhere, fired, disappeared. Marines would clear a cave, move forward, then take fire from the same cave they had just cleared. The tunnels allowed Japanese forces to reoccupy positions after Marines passed. Flamethrowers became essential. Marines used them to clear caves, but the caves connected to larger tunnel networks that extended deep into the volcanic rock where the flames could not reach. Explosives sealed cave entrances, but Japanese engineers would dig new entrances within hours. The Marines learned to adapt. They developed new tactics specifically for Iwo Jima. When they cleared a cave, they would leave a squad behind to guard it and prevent reoccupation. When they encountered a pillbox, they would attack it from multiple directions simultaneously to prevent Japanese soldiers from repositioning through tunnels. Engineers became as important as riflemen. Combat engineers with explosives, flamethrowers, and bulldozers moved at the front of every advance. They would seal caves with explosives, collapse tunnel entrances with bulldozers, and use flamethrowers to force Japanese soldiers out of fortified positions. Tanks learned to work in close coordination with infantry. Tank commanders would spot targets that infantry could not see. Infantry would protect tanks from close-range attacks. Together, they developed tactics for destroying bunkers. A tank would fire directly into a bunker's firing port, while infantry assaulted from the sides with grenades and satchel charges. The fighting was brutal and exhausting. Marines operated under constant stress, never knowing when or where the next attack would come. Japanese soldiers would emerge from spider holes, individual hiding positions camouflaged to be invisible until a Marine stepped on them. They would emerge behind advancing Marines, fire, then disappear back into the hole before anyone could respond. Sleep was nearly impossible. Japanese infiltrators would probe American lines every night, not in mass banzai charges, but in small groups seeking to create chaos and inflict casualties. Marines slept in shifts, always maintaining full alert. The psychological strain was as severe as the physical danger. Every step forward could trigger a mine. Every cave could hide a dozen Japanese soldiers. Every rock formation could conceal a sniper. The constant tension, the inability to see the enemy, the knowledge that the enemy could see them, wore on even the most experienced Marines. On February 27, Marines captured the second airfield. They had been on Iwo Jima for 8 days. American commanders had predicted the island would be secured by then. Instead, fighting intensified. Kuribayashi personally commanded the northern defences. He moved through the tunnels, visiting forward positions, coordinating fire, repositioning forces. He prohibited waste. Every bullet needed to count. Every shell needed to inflict casualties. Soldiers who fired wildly were disciplined. Soldiers who held fire until targets were certain were praised. This was not traditional Japanese military culture. Traditional culture valued aggression, spirit, willingness to die. Kuribayashi valued effectiveness. He told his men their lives mattered only to the extent they inflicted American casualties. Dying accomplished nothing. Inflicting casualties accomplished everything. Kuribayashi shared the hardships of his men. He slept in the tunnels. He ate the same rations. When water became scarce, he received no more than any soldier. His staff wanted to give him better accommodations, but he refused. If his men suffered, he would suffer with them. He wrote letters to his family throughout the battle, though he knew they would never be delivered. In these letters, he expressed no regrets about his tactics. He explained that he was fighting not for victory, but for time. Every day American forces spent on Iwo Jima was one more day Tokyo had to prepare for invasion. Every American casualty was one less soldier who would land on Japan's beaches. He also wrote about his understanding of America. He told his wife that Americans were not the demons Japanese propaganda portrayed. They were ordinary men fighting for their country, just as Japanese soldiers were. He respected their courage and their professionalism. He wished circumstances allowed for peace rather than war. But since war had come, he would fight it as effectively as possible. As the battle progressed and the defensive perimeter shrank, Kuribayashi made difficult decisions about allocating resources. Some positions received reinforcements, others were ordered to fight with what they had. Some units were pulled back to stronger positions, others were told to hold until destroyed. Every decision was calculated to maximize American casualties while preserving Japanese combat effectiveness as long as possible. By mid-March, the situation was hopeless. American forces controlled most of the island. Japanese forces were compressed into a small pocket in the north. Ammunition was running low. Water was gone. Medical supplies were exhausted. Wounded soldiers lay in the tunnels with no treatment available. Food supplies were nearly depleted. Kuribayashi refused to surrender. Surrender was not an option he considered, not because of honor or tradition, but because his mission required continued resistance. As long as even a small force continued fighting, American forces had to remain on Iwo Jima. Resources committed to Iwo Jima could not be used elsewhere. He prepared for the end methodically. He destroyed documents that might provide intelligence to Americans. He distributed remaining ammunition to positions that could still fight effectively. He released soldiers from their duties if they chose to attempt escape, though he knew escape was impossible. Most chose to stay and fight. American forces adapted their tactics. They brought forward more flamethrowers, more demolition teams, more close air support. They developed specialized techniques for clearing fortified positions, Bangalore torpedoes to blow bunker entrances, satchel charges to collapse tunnel sections, napalm to burn out cave networks. Progress continued, but slowly. On March 3, American forces captured the 3rd Airfield. On March 9, Marines reached the northern coastline, splitting Japanese defenses. On March 16, the 5th Marine Division crushed its last pocket of organized resistance, but fighting continued across the island for another 10 days. Kuribayashi remained in command until the end. His final radio transmission to Tokyo came on the evening of March 23, 1945. He reported American forces controlled 98% of Iwo Jima. Japanese forces held a small pocket in the north. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. Water supplies were gone. Medical supplies were depleted. He radioed farewell to the garrison at Chichijima. Tokyo acknowledged the transmission and ordered Kuribayashi to do what he thought necessary. On March 26, Japanese forces launched their final attack. Not a banzai charge, a coordinated infiltration of American rear areas by approximately 300 men. The attack caused confusion and casualties among sleeping Marines and Army Air Force personnel near the 2nd Airfield. Kuribayashi removed his rank insignia and led the attack personally. He likely perished during this action. His body was never identified despite extensive searches. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26, 1945, 36 days of fighting. American casualties were 26,000, including 6,800 fallen. This was more American casualties than the Japanese suffered, the only Pacific battle where this occurred. Japanese casualties were approximately 21,000, with only 216 captured. Kuribayashi had predicted Iwo Jima would delay American forces and inflict casualties far beyond any previous island battle. He was correct. American commanders had expected 2 weeks. The battle lasted 5 weeks. American commanders had expected light resistance after the bombardment. Instead, they encountered the most sophisticated defensive system in the Pacific War. Admiral Nimitz publicly stated that among the Americans who served on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. He also stated that Japanese defensive tactics on Iwo Jima represented a significant evolution in their doctrine. American military analysts studied Kuribayashi's defensive system after the battle. They were impressed. The tunnel networks were more extensive than anything previously encountered. The discipline shown by Japanese forces, not launching counterattacks or banzai charges, indicated exceptional command and control. The integration of terrain, fortification, and tactics demonstrated professional military competence rarely seen in Japanese island defenses. One American colonel wrote in his after-action report that whoever commanded Japanese forces on Iwo Jima clearly understood American capabilities and designed defenses specifically to counter them. The report noted that this was unusual. Most Japanese commanders fought as if facing a Japanese enemy. The Iwo Jima commander fought as if he had studied American tactics in detail. The Marine Corps commissioned multiple studies of the Iwo Jima campaign. These studies examined what worked and what did not work. They analyzed casualties by type of wound, by location, by date. They studied the effectiveness of different weapons. They evaluated tactics and procedures. Several conclusions emerged. First, intelligence had failed to identify the extent of Japanese fortifications. Aerial reconnaissance could not detect underground positions. Better intelligence methods were needed for future operations. Second, the standard 3-day naval bombardment was insufficient against fortified positions. Marine commanders had requested 10 days. They received 3. The inadequate bombardment allowed most Japanese defenses to survive intact. Future operations would require extended bombardments or acceptance of higher casualties. Third, specialized equipment was essential. Flamethrowers, demolitions, and armored bulldozers proved more effective than rifles and grenades against fortified positions. Infantry needed better training and more equipment for this type of warfare. Fourth, the close coordination between infantry, armor, artillery, and air support improved throughout the battle. Early in the campaign, coordination was poor. By the end, units were working together effectively. This coordination needed to be trained and practiced before future operations, not learned during combat. Fifth, casualties among junior officers and non-commissioned officers were extraordinarily high. These leaders were at the front of every advance, exposing themselves to greater danger. Their losses degraded unit effectiveness. Better tactics were needed to preserve leadership while maintaining aggressive operations. The studies also examined Japanese tactics. American analysts recognized that Kuribayashi had created an exceptionally effective defensive system. His emphasis on inflicting casualties rather than holding terrain was noted. His prohibition on banzai charges was recognized as professionally sound. His use of terrain and fortification was studied for lessons applicable to other situations. Some analysts concluded that Iwo Jima represented a new type of warfare. If Japanese commanders on other islands had employed similar tactics, the Pacific War would have been significantly more costly. The fact that only Kuribayashi employed these tactics suggested they were the product of exceptional leadership rather than institutional doctrine. The colonel was correct. Kuribayashi had studied American tactics for 2 years while serving in the United States in the late 1920s. That experience shaped everything he built on Iwo Jima. American post-battle analysis identified several innovations in Kuribayashi's defensive system. First, the complete absence of beach defenses. This contradicted all previous Japanese doctrine, but proved effective. Americans landed unopposed, then walked into prepared kill zones inland, where naval gunfire could not easily support them. Second, the prohibition on banzai charges and counterattacks. This preserved Japanese combat power and forced Americans to dig Japanese soldiers out of fortified positions rather than allowing Japanese soldiers to expose themselves in suicide attacks. Third, the tunnel networks with multiple entrances and blast doors. This allowed Japanese forces to reoccupy positions after Americans passed, creating a defense in depth that American linear tactics struggled to overcome. Fourth, the emphasis on inflicting casualties rather than holding specific terrain. Japanese soldiers were ordered to delay, not defend fixed positions to the last man. When a position became untenable, forces withdrew through tunnels to secondary positions. This maximized American casualties while preserving Japanese combat effectiveness. Fifth, the coordination of indirect fire. Kuribayashi massed artillery and mortar fire on specific target areas, particularly landing beaches and approach routes. This was unusual for Japanese forces, which typically distributed artillery across the battlefield. These innovations made Iwo Jima the costliest battle in Marine Corps history. 22 of the 82 Medals of Honor awarded to Marines in World War II were earned on Iwo Jima, more than 1/4 of the total. The battle also influenced American planning for the invasion of Japan. If an 8-square-mile volcanic rock cost 26,000 American casualties over 36 days, what would the Japanese home islands cost? Iwo Jima demonstrated that Japanese forces, when properly led and employing appropriate tactics, could inflict casualties far beyond what American planners had anticipated. This influenced the decision to use atomic weapons. The projected casualties for invading Japan, based on Iwo Jima casualty rates, were so high that alternative methods to end the war became necessary. American planners calculated that if casualty ratios from recent Pacific battles held for the invasion of Japan, American forces might suffer over 1 million casualties conquering the home islands. These projections were based on experiences at Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Leyte, and other islands, showing that Japanese forces employing effective defensive tactics could inflict casualties far beyond earlier expectations. The Japanese home islands had terrain advantages Iwo Jima lacked. Mountains, forests, urban areas all provided better defensive positions than volcanic rock. The Japanese population could be mobilized for resistance. Civilians could be armed and organized. The defensive potential was enormous. Kuribayashi's tactics demonstrated what was possible when Japanese forces fought intelligently. If every Japanese commander had employed similar tactics, the Pacific War would have lasted years longer and cost hundreds of thousands more casualties. This realization shaped the decision to use atomic weapons in August of 1945. The alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Kuribayashi never knew his defensive tactics would influence the end of the war. He perished, believing he had simply delayed the inevitable. But his legacy extended beyond Iwo Jima. After the war, American military analysts incorporated lessons from Iwo Jima into training doctrine. The importance of intelligence, the need for specialized equipment for fortified positions, the value of combined arms coordination, all received increased emphasis. The Marine Corps developed new tactics for fighting in complex underground defensive systems. These tactics were later used in Korea and Vietnam. Japanese defensive tactics at Iwo Jima also influenced Cold War thinking about defensive warfare. The idea that a numerically inferior force with proper fortifications and tactics could delay or significantly attrit a superior attacking force became central to NATO defensive planning in Europe. Kuribayashi's personal story remained largely unknown for decades after the war. His name was not widely known outside military history circles. That changed in 2006, when director Clint Eastwood released Letters from Iwo Jima, a film based on Kuribayashi's letters to his family. The letters had been discovered and published in Japan in 2002 by author Kumiko Kakehashi. They revealed a man who loved his family, opposed war with America, but fought with everything he had once that war began. The letters showed Kuribayashi's understanding of American strength and his resignation that Japan would lose. They also showed his determination to make Japan's defeat as costly as possible, not out of hatred for America, but out of duty to Japan. Modern American military historians regard Kuribayashi as one of the most capable Japanese commanders of World War II. His understanding of American tactics, his willingness to abandon traditional doctrine, and his focus on effectiveness over tradition made him unique among Japanese general officers. What is certain is that Kuribayashi's defense of Iwo Jima remains the most effective Japanese island defense of the Pacific War by casualty ratio, duration, and strategic impact. His willingness to learn from Americans and use that knowledge against them demonstrated intellectual flexibility rare in senior military officers of any nation. Today, Iwo Jima is administered by Japan, and access is restricted. The island hosts a Japanese self-defense force base and a memorial to both Japanese and American forces who fought there. The tunnels Kuribayashi's men dug remain largely intact. Japanese and American veterans have visited together on anniversaries, honoring both sides' courage. The strategic importance Iwo Jima held in 1945 no longer exists. The airfields are gone. The island has no military value in modern warfare, but during the war, Iwo Jima proved invaluable to American operations. Within days of the island being secured, American engineers began repairing the airfields. By early April, B-29 bombers were using Iwo Jima as an emergency landing site. Over the remaining months of the war, over 2,200 B-29s made emergency landings on Iwo Jima. These aircraft carried nearly 25,000 crewmen. Without Iwo Jima, many of these aircraft and crews would have been lost. Fighter escorts also operated from Iwo Jima. P-51 Mustangs based on the island could escort bombers all the way to Tokyo and back. This fighter protection significantly reduced bomber losses over Japan. The bombing campaign became more effective and less costly, with Iwo Jima providing fighter cover and emergency landing capability. The human cost of taking Iwo Jima was terrible. 26,000 American casualties, 6,800 dead, but the island provided emergency landing capability and fighter support that proved invaluable to the strategic bombing campaign. The decision to invade Iwo Jima was militarily sound, even knowing the cost. The lessons learned there remain relevant. The battle demonstrated that tactics matter more than numbers, that understanding your enemy matters more than courage, and that well-designed defenses can multiply the effectiveness of limited forces. Kuribayashi proved that an island everyone said was indefensible could be defended if the defender understood the attacker better than the attacker understood himself. He had spent 2 years studying America, traveling its cities, watching its factories, training with its army. When he designed Iwo Jima's defenses, he knew exactly what he was defending against: American firepower, American logistics, American combined arms tactics. He designed every tunnel, positioned every gun, planned every defensive position to counter specific American capabilities. The result was a battle that should have lasted 2 weeks and instead lasted 5. A battle American planners expected would cost a few thousand casualties and instead cost 26,000. A battle that demonstrated the limits of material superiority when faced with intelligent defensive design. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor and hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from history every single day. Stories about military leaders who proved themselves through intelligence and preparation. Real people, real history. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, Japan, Canada, or Australia? Our community stretches across the world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if you knew about Kuribayashi before this video. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure General Kuribayashi does not disappear from history. These leaders deserve to be remembered for their competence and their courage, and you are helping make that happen.